Now, as you may know, before The Last Jedi came out, I did make another video on the topic of Reylo, or the possibility of some type of relationship forming between Rey and Kylo Ren. And in that video I said it was almost certainly going to happen on some level, that these two characters would find a reason to start to care for each other, that this new trilogy would not just be a simple story of Kylo Ren on the dark versus Rey on the light, that some other dynamic would have to be added to make this trilogy more compelling. And if you look at the final duels in the previous two trilogies, with Anakin vs. Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith and Luke vs. Vader in Return of the Jedi, it means this eventual final duel or encounter between Kylo and Rey, which will almost certainly happen in Episode 9, has a lot to live up to, and has to be far more than just two individuals hell-bent on stopping or wanting to kill each other with no emotional investment of any kind in each other. Lightsaber battles are great, and one of the best parts of Star Wars, one could argue, but they are little more than people swinging colored sticks at each other if there's nothing behind those battles. So what I'm going to do in this video is not really set out to give you either an argument for or against Reylo, or more specifically Kylo Ren and Rey ending up together in some fashion at the end of Episode 9, but rather try to rationally and logically ask what's not only the best way to end this story, but also ask if these two riding off into the sunset together, if you will, would and could make sense and be a good ending for the entire story of the Skywalkers. And if that ending would be accepted and enjoyed by the general audience. I'll also broach the topic of if it's even morally right for Kylo to not only be forgiven for his past transgressions, such as murdering Han Solo in cold blood or committing patricide, but if he truly deserves a happy ending at this point. And to start, let's look at the ending the Star Wars saga, or the story of the Skywalkers, used to have, that being Darth Vader destroying the Emperor to save his son at the end of Return of the Jedi. And I think perhaps one of the more fascinating questions in all of Star Wars is, what if Vader had survived? And by that I mean, what if he had still saved his son and tossed Palpatine down the pit, but not been electrocuted in the process and had his suit fried? First, we'd have to ask, would he have fully come back to the light? I mean, we assume that Vader, after he destroys Palpatine, has fully become Anakin Skywalker again, and the fact that his Force ghost shows up at the end of the movie seems to confirm this. But Vader knew he was about to die after he saved his son. He knew his suit was done for, and a case could be made this heavily weighed on the internal decisions he made at this point, and he wanted to come to peace with all that he had done before he died, and to reward his son's faith in him. His last words were even, "Tell your sister you were right about me," implying it was important to Vader or Anakin that it be known that he did come back to the light. But if his suit hadn't been damaged, do we have a scene like the one we got in The Last Jedi? One where, after Vader disposes of Palpatine, Luke is saying, "Come on, let's get out of here and help the rebels finish off this fight." But Vader replies by saying, "I've got a better idea. With Palpatine gone, let's go with my original plan and rule this whole damn galaxy together." Which is, of course, basically what happened between Rey and Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi. And these two throne room scenes are basically carbon copies of each other in almost every respect, except Vader had to give his life to save Luke, and Kylo did not to save Rey. So it'd be interesting to see those scenes played in reverse, and how Kylo would respond or what he'd say to Rey if he had given his life to stop Snoke and save her, and what Vader would have said and done if he hadn't had given up his life to stop Palpatine and save his son. And no, I'm not trying to cast doubt on the end of Return of the Jedi and Vader or Anakin's motives and decisions at the end of that movie, but even if Vader had survived and fully come back to the light, what would have happened next for him? I mean, imagine if Vader and Luke had shown up together to the celebration at Bright Tree Village after the second Death Star was destroyed. What was Luke going to say to everybody about Vader? Something like, "No, it's cool, everybody, he's come back to the light, and he's Anakin again. Everything he did as Vader doesn't count against him." Because something tells me that explanation alone wasn't going to fly, and Vader would have immediately been detained and, at best, spent the rest of his life in a prison cell, or at worst been executed. And the same goes for Kylo Ren. What if he does come back to the light at the end of Episode 9 and survives? Assuming he does something heroic and essentially saves the galaxy, or at least the day. Should he then automatically be forgiven for everything and allowed to live a happy life with Rey? I mean, at the start of The Force Awakens, we see him give the order to have a full village of people slaughtered before later in that same movie killing his own father Han Solo in cold blood. And these are only the things we've actually seen him do. There's no doubt a long list of other horrible deeds that he's done off-screen, if you will, any of which would mean he would never find true forgiveness in the real world, and instead would hear the masses calling for justice and for him to be punished and punished severely. You can't just wrong a bunch of people or murder them and then help or save the lives of an equal number of people and be all squared up and not have to face consequences. That's just not how it works. And to think there's anything Kylo could do at this point that would earn him a wide accepted forgiveness is really just kind of silly. And to that, you might argue that this isn't the real world, and that Star Wars has always been about love and forgiveness. But it's also, more so in my opinion at least, been about choices and consequences. Anakin Skywalker within the prequels had plenty of opportunities to make the right choice and to stop his fall to the dark side. Yes, you could say that Palpatine played him like a puppet on strings and was the reason for his fall, but when it came right down to it, it was Anakin and Anakin alone that made the final choice to pick Palpatine and the Sith over Windu and the Jedi. And for that choice, there were consequences. In each of the first two sequel trilogy movies now, Kylo has been given a chance and a choice to turn from the dark path, first by his father Han Solo in The Force Awakens, and then by Rey in The Last Jedi. But both times he made the choice to reject that, and now there must be consequences. And though you may disagree with me or simply not like this idea, and I'm not saying I love it either, but I believe one of the points of The Last Jedi was to show that Ben Solo cannot be saved, and that the Skywalkers must end. For as much good as they can do, they are also capable of equal parts harm and destruction. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that Rey is almost certainly going to win this trilogy in some respect, though likely at a cost. There's also, keeping in line with how the previous two trilogies ended, going to be a tragic element in the ending of the story. I don't see any way, shape, or form that this is a 100% happy ending for everybody, nor should it be for many reasons, like the ones I've laid out before about Kylo or Ben being beyond the point of absolute forgiveness or redemption. I mean, think about the real world in which we all live for a moment and the tragedies that befall it, and then ask yourself if Disney really wants to send a message to kids that can be construed as there are no real repercussions for being a part of mass murder or patricide, and that in the end, you'll get the girl and live happily ever after. So I'm sorry, but even if you think it's a great ending to have Rey and Kylo fall in love and save the galaxy, I can't see Disney giving them the green light to do it. They just wouldn't risk the backlash that would come with it. Also, I know there are a lot of people out there analyzing the hell out of the previous two movies, and they're doing some great work, don't get me wrong, and they're looking for themes or comparing it to other mythos out there and trying to predict how this trilogy is going to end. And you might love where they suggest this story is heading, but remember where the overanalyzing of The Force Awakens got us in regards to how The Last Jedi played out. Remember all the good breaking down every scene and every line from The Force Awakens did. And then remember that none of it mattered, and that all that did matter was the story Rian Johnson wanted to tell. Just like all that matters now is J.J. Abrams is going to tell the story he wants to tell in Episode 9. And I'm not saying these theory videos aren't fun or entertainment in themselves. I did a ton of them before The Last Jedi came out and was on the right track with some of my predictions, but wasn't even close to getting the whole story right. And I bring this up because a few weeks ago I made another video discussing how I thought this trilogy was going to end. And many people either got angry at me or simply replied, Reylo is endgame. Because in that video I suggested that it was almost a certainty that Kylo Ren would die in one of two ways, by either sacrificing himself for a greater good, or by Rey being forced to destroy him because Kylo simply would not give up. And I came to those conclusions because, well, again, for a lot of the reasons I've already laid out here, like the simple question of just what would happen to Kylo Ren if he survives? Do him and Rey go off into hiding together and live out the rest of their days like that? I mean, the whole galaxy isn't just going to forgive Kylo Ren. He did stand by and watch as billions or maybe even trillions of people were vaporized in the Hosnian system. And though he himself may not have suggested it or gave the actual order, he was there when Hux proposed it to Snoke, and neither offered up an objection nor made his stand against his master then, in an effort to stop the deaths of so many people. Nor did he secretly send a message to his mother or anyone else in the New Republic, warning them about what was going to happen. In other words, he was complicit in the deaths of perhaps hundreds of billions of people. And what happens after the fact isn't the only problem Reylo faces, because you have to convince the audience that these two would indeed fall in love over the course of the next movie. And you might say they've already fallen in love during The Last Jedi, but that's not exactly the impression I got, at least. They formed a type of connection or realized they were kindred spirits, but I'm not sure they fell in love. In fact, not to take a shot at the movie, but I really don't know what Rey was thinking by going to Kylo to try and save him. How did she think flying an escape pod into the Supremacy, Snoke's flagship, was going to end? Honestly, her rash decision does feel like a bit of a convenience, or an easy way to get these two characters together for the end of the movie. And speaking of that, how do you now bring these characters together once more in Episode 9? Does Rey again go to Kylo because she thinks she can save him for real this time? I mean, they're not just going to bump into each other in the grocery store and strike up a conversation. There has to be a good way and a good reason for them to not only be in the same place at the same time, but for them to not immediately attack each other when that does happen. Because currently, there's really nothing for the two of them to rally around, if you will. Nothing the two of them would need to come together to stop, like Snoke could have been, for example. They are now firmly on opposite sides of the fight, and have had many previous interactions that let us know they cannot and will not see eye to eye unless something radically changes for one or both of them. Okay, so what then brings them together in a way that doesn't feel totally contrived in Episode 9? My best guess, and it's only a guess, is that Rey will learn the truth about the Skywalker family. She may even read about it or the prophecy in those books she took from the tree at the First Jedi Temple. Books it was heavily implied that Luke didn't entirely read himself. This truth will of course force her to confront Kylo Ren again to stop him one way or the other, either by bringing him back to the light or by destroying him. I also think, as I suggested in my previous video about this, that Kylo and the First Order will be losing at the start of this movie, that many years will have passed since the end of The Last Jedi, and the New Rebellion, along with maybe the remnants of the Republic, are on the verge of victory, and Kylo is down to one last desperate effort. This will, in theory, make Kylo even more sympathetic and make his eventual demise even more tragic, since he just couldn't let go and admit defeat. I then think the best possible scenario for Reylo fans is that Kylo does finally give up on whatever his crazy plans are, and that Rey allows him to simply walk away, though I think there's almost zero chance she's walking with him. However, I think it's more likely that Rey will be forced to destroy Kylo, to end the Skywalkers, and it will tear her apart to do so. Again, just a guess, and you might and probably do hate it if you're a fan of Reylo, but you really have to ask yourself if you think Disney will let their new Jedi princess walk off into the sunset at the end of this trilogy with the murderous bad boy who stood by and watched an entire star system get destroyed. And flat out right now, I really don't know how Episode 9 is going to end, nor does anybody else besides J.J. Abrams and anybody who has read his script. Though I do think there are three huge factors that all need to be considered if you really want to make an educated guess as to how it will end. First, what makes logical sense for the story that has been told thus far? And I mean taking into account all previous 8 episodes. In other words, what's a good ending that makes sense for the whole story? Not just what necessarily works best for Rey and Kylo Ren. Second then, what will J.J. Abrams do? Does he maybe lean towards answering some of the questions he started in The Force Awakens, or does he try to continue the story of The Last Jedi more or less? Maybe, is it a combination of the two, or does he instead just do whatever he wants at this point? Which leads us to the third factor. What will JJ be allowed to do, or what say will Disney and Lucasfilm have in all this? Again, you might love the idea of Reylo and think it's a perfect ending, and maybe JJ Abrams agrees with you, but will Disney? And I'm not saying they'll control every aspect of the story, but you have to keep in mind how vested they are in the success of this next movie. The Last Jedi has taken a lot of heat from fans. Maybe it's a vocal minority, or maybe it's a fair percentage of the fan base. Who knows? But they have no doubt heard it, and it does concern them, even if they'd never admit it. So, not to try and sink the Reylo ship here, but I would remind anybody aboard that there is a lot of other ways that this story could end, and ways that might actually make more sense for the greater story, and that won't stir up controversy for Disney. Again, I'm not saying it won't happen, I can't know that for sure, and I certainly think their relationship, or their friendship, or kinship, or whatever you'd like to call it at this point, will be a big part of the final movie in the trilogy. Again, them caring about each other adds a dynamic similar to the final battles of the other two trilogies. But again, looking at those other two final battles and how they played out, I just don't see this one between Rey and Kylo being a fairy tale-like happy ending. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments and tell me what you think. Can you realistically see a happy ending for both Rey and Kylo? And if so, how do we get there and what does it look like? Or do you think this ship is just destined to sink and be more in line with the endings of the previous 2 trilogies? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.